Tonight, we're discussing the role of religion in modern society as over 1 million people descend on Madrid to hear the Pope. Well, the next talking point is whether faith can heal political divides. Before we discuss, let's take a quick look at this report.
Issa is Palestinian, Hiba and Terez are Israelis, but all three are Catholic. They're among an estimated 1 million Christians from around the world expected in the Spanish capital for the World Youth Day festival. For 6 days, they'll be sleeping under the same roof and sharing meals.
I'm so happy to be here, to recognize this group and to meet new people, to hear and to be together in this group.
So for us, it's a special event that we can meet together, both Israeli Christians and Palestinian Christians, because of the difficulties we face to reach and to meet each other because of the closure of the Palestinian territory.
This Madrid neighbourhood is currently home to 160 Israeli and Palestinian youths. They made their way to the country separately and met for the first time a week ago. Christians make up just 1.5% of the Israeli and Palestinian populations, down from around 25% in the 19th century.
Being a Christian in Palestine, it's a challenge because you have to give a testimony for your belief. We live among Jews, Muslims, and we are Christians.
On Wednesday, a mass in Arabic was led by the Bishop of Iraq, where Palestinians mingled with young Jordanians and Iraqis. For many Middle Eastern pilgrims, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet so many others of a similar faith.
And we're hearing that in Madrid now, Pope Benedict XVI has left the Pope-mobile and is mingling among those young people we were talking about earlier. There he is, live pictures coming to you then from Madrid. He's meeting some of the people who have travelled to the capital of Spain for this event, which hasn't been without controversy. There have been protests about who's footing the bill. There you can see some of the young people attending. 1.5 million people expected over the next 4 days for this event. And we can expect to hear more from the Pope later in the weekend, but there he is. Andrew Cropson, I'd like to get back to you if I can, CEO of the British Humanist Association. We just heard that report as well. Now, is there ever a case when religion and belief and faith can help people rise above political divides, where they might get together where they wouldn't otherwise do so? We just saw, of course, the example of Israelis and Palestinians united in their faith.
Well, of course, religious beliefs, like any other sorts of strong beliefs or strong identity, can often bring people who share that characteristic together in a very strong unity. And in a world where otherwise they may have different competing identities, as a Palestinian or as an Israeli, for example, it might for a while dissolve those differences. But history can show us again and again that it doesn't take long for strong internal group identities to often convert into hostility to people not part of that group. Any in-group, whether national or religious or political, may have a very strong internal solidarity, but the risk is always that it will then be converted into hostility to people outside that group, and that we've seen again and again, I think, is very much the downside of religious identities. There's always also the problem, of course, that if we pinned our hope on the coming together of people of certain religions for the future of peace, then we'd have to deal with a constantly changing religious demographic. I mean, religious identity and observance and belief in Western Europe, for example, continues its long-term decline. And in other parts of the world, of course, religious belief and identities are likewise unstable. So I think tying any hope of social cohesion or peace or unity in the world to the idea of religion would be a high-risk strategy and generate its own problems as well.
He's got a point, hasn't he, Bishop? People are just a lot less religious than they were before, particularly in Europe.
Statistics give the lie to that assertion. Church attendance is up. Certainly there's a tremendous power remaining to religion. We were talking about 1.5 million young people, but look at the Kirchentag in Germany, which brings together 500,000 people, Lutherans and Catholics. I don't see that religious observance is where this gentleman says it is. It's a resurgence, actually.
All right. Tom?
Well,
there's no denying that church attendance is down from, say, 50 years ago. Over the decades, it's gone down. But that doesn't mean that belief has gone down. And you see, belief has sometimes switched away from the established churches. And you see with New Age spirituality, things like that. So a majority of people still have some sort of belief, but that doesn't mean that they have a belonging then to a specific church.
Perhaps they're humanists, Andrew Copson.
They may well be. A lot of people obviously are without even knowing the word. But I think that if you look at something like the Eurobarometer survey, for example, which looks over a number of EU countries over a long period of time, then you find again and again that the stated importance of religion or belief to people is declining over time. And I'm not aware of any statistics that show any sort of significant either long-term or short-term increase in attendance either, such as the Bishop referred to. So I'd be interested to see them if they were. But all the demographic research that I've seen, not just from Britain and Scandinavian countries, but from other Western European countries that have traditionally been Catholic, shows again and again that the level of not just attendance, but of belief in God and in particular religions, and also in identity, is declining and continuing to decline, and even in the case of people who have a Muslim heritage who are now living in Europe, is also declining, albeit from a higher level.
And why do you think that is?
Why do I think it is? Well, I don't have any personal theories, but a lot of the academic evidence seems to point that, for example, in places where social democracy is stronger and the institutions of the social state, there's less reliance on religious identity to give a sort of social comfort or solidarity or vital services. I think it's definitely the case that as different scientific ways of understanding the world have advanced and gained credence, especially in Western Europe, that less emphasis has been placed on religions as a way of understanding the universe. And I also think that increasingly, through the lives of our fellow European citizens who are not religious and live decent and humane and fulfilling lives, the example that non-religious people and the decline of religion in Europe has not led to any sort of dehumanization or reverse of civilization continues to be a reason why people have, with the range of options in front of them, chosen not to believe in religion or to be part of a religion because they see that that's a possibility.
Okay, all right. Myra, you wanted to respond to that?
Yes, I would beg to differ with Andrew. From my point of view as an external, not looking at statistics or anything else, the last 20 years, I'd say, of living in Europe, in France, I feel a resurgence of religion, Christian religion. Now, you're saying two things, Andrew. One is concerning the Muslims. You feel that the Muslims living in the West are less present or less. They are just less demonstrative because the majority of the Muslims who live in France, for example, just want to live a quiet life. They don't want to be reminded every single day that they are different. They just want and hope and pray to their God quietly that one day they will just be considered as any other French person.
That's an interesting point. If I could just pick you up on that. Do you think people have become embarrassed about their faith in the modern world? Because we do hear a lot of negative associations with religion. Do you think people have come to hide their beliefs sometimes in public life?
I think so, because it's not the majority view. And in fact, one of the things that the Pope said today was telling these young Catholics, don't be ashamed to say that you're a Christian. He's trying to encourage them to be more open about it. There are curious things, though. If you talk about statistics, when you look here in France, for example, regular church attendance is maybe 5%, 10% at the most. But in recent polls, 64% of the people identified as Catholic. In Spain, about 75%, according to polls, identify as Catholic, even though about 15% or so go to Mass regularly. There's something there. There's a gap between believing in something and belonging to the institutions. And that's the challenge for the institutions. The institutionalized churches are, in a way, out of step, or maybe the people are out of step with the churches are out of step with the people. But there is a gap, and so you can't just say, oh, there's only 5% church attendance, therefore nobody believes.
Is that something you agree with, Bishop?
Absolutely. I think that the different institutions of the churches are out of step with where people are at today.
And how can they address that?
Pardon?
How can they address that?
I mean, how do we address that?
How can you address that? Exactly. How can
Well, the first thing is
you make sure people that do believe have somewhere to go and feel that that place is relevant for them?
That's the first thing. The second thing is to be much more welcoming to people who are different than we are. That's extremely important in churches in Europe, non-European churches. The third thing is that we need to emphasize what we're really about. We are not about really emphasizing some kind of moral life. Morality is not the basis of Christianity. Faith in God is, and your faith is supposed to change you, to transform you into someone who is more like Jesus Christ. So that has moral implications, of course, but that is the point. And that's really what people are looking for. They're not looking for an institution. I mean, we're looking at all these pictures of the Pope, but he's not the only reason why all those young people were there. And the institutional church across the board, and I'm not going to say anything negative about the Roman Catholic Church on television, but we all have to change, and at heart we all know it. And some of us are working at it, and I think we're getting better at it. Andrew
Copson.
Well, I think liberal progressive movements in any religion or any powerful institution can only be welcomed in that they make, of course, those religions and those institutions better both for the people who are otherwise oppressed by them and better for society as a whole. But I think that even if we resort to the question of identity, saying, well, people might not go to churches, they might not really believe in the various things they used to believe in, but they still have some sort of identity, then again we're missing the point. Many people may have what they say as a religious identity. In England, it's very common for people who don't believe in Jesus Christ as a real person, who never go to church and who don't believe in God, to nonetheless tick Christian on the national census form or on other sorts of polls because they have a vague cultural identity. But again, I think that if we encourage people to resort to those identities, then that can be dangerous. Identities can bring people together, but they can also bring people apart. For example, in the English census, it's more likely for people to tick Christian, even if they're not religious, in areas where there's been lots of Muslim immigration than in areas where there hasn't. And we can see there that that concept of religious identity, far from being something that we ought to encourage and find ways to encourage, is actually the symptom of a social division that we need to work on rationally and in a way that treats people not as if they were members of different religious groups, but as if they were citizens of a common country in a secular sense. And I think that would be a far more fruitful area for us all to concentrate on when we try and see how we can best secure the civil peace of Europe in future decades, than on trying to resort to what many people see as outmoded group identifications based on identities and beliefs and practices that are not having a resonance for people in this continent that they once had.
More about cultural identity than actual belief?
I think it's a need for belonging. I think we have a whole generation before us has lost belonging. They don't belong to a country, there's Europe. They don't belong to Europe, there's the world. They don't belong to a religion, there is deism, which I perfectly respect and agree with, but they need belonging. Therefore, the figurehead of a pope has a meaning. They belong to this chap who's, sorry, Bishop.
It's all right.
They belong to a person. Second remark I have is ticking the little crosses as to religion. This is something I absolutely am against. And in the whole Middle East, this
because it doesn't happen in France, of course, does it?
It does not happen in France. It's illegal. But in England, it does happen. And in the whole of the Middle East, it does happen, whereby you create problems. I mean, on your ID card in the Arab world, you have your religion. So that when there is a period of trouble, you're stopped in the street and everybody knows you're a Muslim. So if the person who is arresting you is not a Muslim, he's against you. By definition, by just the tick of a cross on a paper. That's the sort of thing that really, I would say, secularism would help.
And I just wanted to talk just briefly about the United States and how different the political system is there. Because if a politician or a candidate was to say they didn't believe in God, they wouldn't get very far with the American population, would they? It's quite an interesting paradox in such a modern liberal democracy, isn't it?
No, none of them dare. There must be some atheists in Congress, but none of them dare say it. And very often in the States, the idea is if somebody is religious, that shows that they're a good person. That's what they're trying to, that's the message
They
they're
have a
trying to
moral
get
basis.
over. But it's interesting to see we've got two Mormons in the Republican running now, Mitt Romney and John, what's his name? John, the second one, the Huntsman, sorry. And they're both Mormons, and there's talk within the Republican ranks of people, mostly evangelicals, who don't like Mormons and might not vote for Romney because he's a Mormon and things. It's a curious complication in American politics, but it exists.
It's as though you have to have a certain amount of religion, but not quite too much. And of course, the other example is Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, who didn't convert to Catholicism until after he left office.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite in Britain. About identity, I just wanted to add one thing. There's an interesting phenomenon in religions now, is that the religions that are expanding the most strongly in recent decades are the ones with the strongest identities. Mormonism is one of them. Or take Orthodox Judaism among the Jews, or the traditional Catholicism that Benedict is promoting. You see more and more conservative Muslims too. And I think, as you say, I think this is a question of feeling that we want to belong somewhere, because we're in a globalized world where you don't know anymore. And you begin to go, well, what do I belong to? Where do I go? Where do I go? And where do I look for my values? It's one of the deepest feelings that humans have, is some sort of religious feeling, if they have it, and they're turning to that.
Right.
It's also sometimes an answer to a poor social situation. I mean, it's no wonder that people would flock now to religions when there is a problem.
But that's also a reason for atheism, is it not? If you look around the world and see what's happening, you might think, how can that possibly
save you? No, you need to believe in something that will save you. Even if you don't understand anything in economics, you rely on somebody who does. And this somebody, if you don't know any better, may be God.
All right. There has been a lot of talk in recent weeks about people losing a sense of who they are, a sense of identity, haven't they? Just very, very briefly, what can the church offer them to make them feel better about that?
Well, I don't know any atheists who've ever founded hospitals and orphanages, by the way. I mean, we do provide a huge amount of social services, especially in England, by the way. So there is that. But the key thing that I think is the most important across the religious question is we need to rediscover, reevaluate the common good, the idea that we're all in this together.
All right. Andrew Copson, I'm going to give you the very last word on that in 20 seconds. Tell us what humanism can offer people who feel lost and in need of guidance.
Well, I think it's a very cheap and stupid point to say that atheists have never founded pro-social institutions. For example, there are many institutions in India, like the Atheist Centre, which has worked with untouchables and works to try and solve incredible social problems that exist there. The flip side of what was just said by that bishop, that the Roman Catholic Church supports lots of efforts, is that often it's also been against state efforts to do so. The Roman Catholic Church in Britain, for example, was among the few institutions that opposed the setting up of the National Health Service, which was an inspiration of not only Christians but many humanist politicians. So I think that if we're going to make calls for the common good, which, by the way, I completely agree with, obviously, and have worked often with religious people for that sort of thing, then I think that representatives of religious organisations should try and swallow back the temptation to make cheap jibes at other people like that one.
I'll try.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
It's difficult, I know.
Let's end feeling harmonious and spiritual after these discussions. Thank you very much indeed to all of my guests this evening. Thanks for being with us and thanks for watching. I'll be back at the same time tomorrow with The World This Week. Don't miss that. Until then, good night.